Hi, I'm Nicole France, Chief Evangelist at Contentful, and I'd like to talk a little bit about why we're so focused on digital content in the first place. What are we really trying to accomplish? And more importantly, how are we building for the future of the content we're creating and the things that we really want it to do? So let me start with a question. What is your go-to? Are you still headed for the search bar, Google, or anywhere else? Or are you gravitating more toward generative AI? I mean, it might be Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity. If you're like me and like an awful lot of the people that I've been talking to, the answer is often it depends. And it's interesting to me that in a little bit more than a year, we've already seen a really significant shift in how we think about where we go to find information and what that experience looks like. Not just what it looks like, but what happens afterwards. Do we click through to a website? Chances are we probably do that less and less often. And this is happening on top of a set of really significant SEO changes that have already seen things like declines in search volumes and certainly declines in traffic being referred from searches. So there's a whole lot of change afoot here. And it's a much longer conversation, exactly what the implications for things like SEO are. But the main headline here is we can't keep doing things the way we've been doing them because circumstances are changing really significantly. And it's not just a question of generative AI and search. Let me ask you this, where do you get your news? A lot of that answer is probably going to depend on your age, what generation you're in. The reality is, though, regardless of age, fewer and fewer people are reading news from newspapers, whether that's in an actual print version, my preferred, I have to say, or even online. People aren't watching television news, whether it's cable or network anymore either. I mean, young people are far more likely to say TikTok. If you look at the median age of people who are watching MTV, it's 51. That's not even news. That is an even higher age range. We're talking people in their mid to late 60s. So here we have yet another example of where not only has the idea of broadcast media really changed, it's become very, very fragmented. So too has popular culture. We aren't watching the same things necessarily. We're certainly not watching them at the same time the way we used to when TV broadcasts and film releases at cinemas were the main way that we entertained ourselves. This is a very big shift. It's been happening for a long time, but it's becoming more and more pointed because the implications for us as businesses are that we need to do a much better job of understanding where the audiences are that we want to reach and being in those places. Now, this also coincides with another really big trend that any marketers listening to this are going to feel probably in their inner core, and that is the growing importance of first-party data. It's not just the deprecation of third-party cookies. Hey, anybody remember that whole generative AI search thing? Guess what? You don't even have to be going to one of those tools to get from Google an AI overview that might well obviate the need for clicking on any of the sources that it's actually recommending here. But the most important part of what I want to get across here is that first party data has been for a long time growing in value and importance, and that is only increasing. So we have this interesting kind of dichotomy. On one hand, we have things like generative AI search and summaries that mean we maybe don't even have to go directly to the places that we might have gone to before to get information. And at the same time, as businesses, we are focused more and more on really trying to drive that direct interaction that allows us to gain the data and the insight and the knowledge of who our consumers really are. This is a really big deal, and it's only getting more and more important. It's in fact one of the big reasons why you see companies like Kraft Heinz making a very significant shift in their overall digital strategy. Now, Kraft Heinz to me is a really interesting example of this because they don't sell directly to consumer. I mean, a very, very small amount. Their actual customers, if you think about who's buying directly from them, are retailers, are grocery stores. But they really want and need to have this direct relationship with their consumers. I mean, part of this is how those brands that are part of Kraft Heinz even began to have the kind of scope and scale that they do today. And that is by being part of popular culture. They always have been. It's part of the recipe, so to speak. And that's no less true now than it was in the early days of these brands. It's just that the means of interacting and engaging with those consumers has changed very significantly. So that's why Justin Thomas and the team at Kraft Heinz have really significantly reinvested in a shift in strategy as well as the tools that underpin that. So they are focused a lot more on things like social media in campaigns and activities and activations that are combining things in the digital space and in the physical space. They're doing this with a sense of humor, but also a sense of what really matters to people in the day-to-day world. So Ollie or AI.Ollie, Aioli, anyone, is the digital online recipe tool that helps customers to make a menu plan, figure out recipes with things that are in their cupboards. This is a really important way of engaging their customers, their consumers, that is, as well. And again, it's all about picking up on and reinforcing part of the conversation that's happening with their consumers. So you get things like a Heinz ketchup bottle that is inspired by, and in fact, almost a direct facsimile of Ed Sheeran's ketchup tattoo. Not high on my list, but certainly something that matters to a whole lot of people that are really big Heinz ketchup fans. It's not just a question of consumer brands, though, but this is a great example of where building that direct relationship with consumers is a critical source of information for a company like Kraft Heinz. And they're taking a page out of a book that, for me, as a good LA girl, is a really important and fascinating one, and that is storytelling. So, of course, I always think in the first place of probably the arch master of all time, Walt Disney, who all the way back in the 1960s had this prescient statement. It is a curious thing that the more the world shrinks because of electronic communications, the more limitless becomes the province of the storytelling entertainer. Certainly what we're talking about here when it comes to finding and attracting an audience, building a relationship, getting and keeping that attention of these people that we hope to build long-term, durable, and hopefully profitable relationships with, storytelling is at the core. But it's not just a matter of storytelling as a way of attracting eyeballs in the first place. In fact, there's a tremendous amount of storytelling that happens throughout the customer relationship lifecycle at different points in the journey and throughout that relationship over time. Let me give you an analogy. I mean, if you look at Disneyland, I did say I'm an LA girl, so it is Disneyland. There is as much story, I would argue, in how the park is laid out and how you're subtly or not so subtly nudged to navigate through the park across these different lands, into these different places, into these different storylines, as there is in any of the individual stories or even the specific rides themselves. It's all about a bigger story, a bigger, in the case of businesses like ours, brand stories. So I think this is an important source of inspiration because all of this comes down to how we actually build relationships and how we meet our customers where they are. And as I've hopefully tried to get you to see here, our customers, our consumers are in, so to speak, a variety of different places. And that means as businesses, no matter what kind of industry we're in or who we're selling to, we have to be in all these digital places as well, at least the ones that make sense for the audiences that we really care about reaching and engaging with. Gucci is in Roblox. You can wonder why that is. And I'll tell you, it's really not to flog expensive accessories to preteens. It is, however, to create a long-term sense of aspiration and to create that audience that at some point in the future is actually going to become a Gucci customer, or so they hope. I always like the example of Bombas as well. I mean, this is a fairly simple and straightforward one. It's a comparison between me and my colleague, Nick, who's one of our solution engineers. We're both really big fans of the slippers that they came out with a couple years ago, and we both bought them pretty soon after they came onto the market. I, like a good Gen Xer, got an email promoting them. So I went to their website and that's where I bought them. Nick, on the other hand, is a millennial and he just bought them straight on Instagram. If Bombas hadn't recognized those different channels, they wouldn't have necessarily sold to us at least as quickly as they did. But it's not just a consumer thing either. I mean, look at Launch Darkly's Dev Morning Show at night. This is a podcast that is a totally different form of content that's in a different place, so to speak, that's attracting a very different audience. It's the developers that are the people who use Launch Darkly. And it's all about building that relationship with them in a far more nuanced and in-depth kind of way. So a much smaller audience, arguably, but a very, very important one that is based all on building relationships of depth and of substance. Sometimes it is as simple as having a really good crossover with someone like Zendaya and a really great product in the case of On Running, and putting that out on TikTok because that's where your mutual fans are likely to be. We also see increasingly some great examples of generative AI or AI in other contexts being used to do this. So Klarna is one example. What they've done is take a knowledge base that was built in Contentful for customer support and use that to train an LLM through retrieval augmentation generation to build an extremely capable and sophisticated service bot. They've got some impressive statistics about what they are already seeing in terms of impact, like reducing first call or first contact resolution from 11 minutes to 2 minutes. And they also see this being a really significant financial driver for them, generating not only cost savings, but actually improving their ability to upsell and sell new services to additional customers. So they see some very significant gains from this. On the other hand, we've got some good examples that are emerging of personalization, and Ruggable is, in my mind, one of the best examples of this that I've seen so far. They have a design assistant, an AI-driven design assistant that they're working on that will allow you as a customer to upload a photo of the room that you're trying to decorate. It will pick up on the color palettes and some of the design cues to try to understand your design style. It'll make rug recommendations based on color palette and design style. And here's what's kind of cool. The other extra bit of AI, aside from the image recognition and categorization, is some subtle adjustment to the product description that goes along with the rugs that they're recommending to pick up on some of those color cues and design ideas that are more likely to really resonate with you as you look at and flip through the different rug options that they're recommending. So these are all great examples of having a very clear sense of where your customers are and designing for both the audiences and the channels and the tools that you're using to reach them. This to me is a critical part of this bigger idea of personalization. Yeah, it's about getting the name right and having some recognition of past transactions or interactions, but it's actually even more about building a connection that feels personal, building that emotional bond between an individual and a brand or a company. It's about delivering what feels personal. And as challenging as that is, there are certainly many examples like the ones I've just shown you of companies that do a very good job of that. It's not necessarily easy or straightforward because there's so much complexity involved in doing this in the first place, especially if we're trying to do that at any kind of significant scale. I mean, on one hand, we have the variety of customer segments that we're trying to reach and engage with effectively. We may have multiple brands. We're doing this in many cases across multiple geographies and languages, certainly across multiple channels. But we're also trying to manage the internal complexities involved in getting this right as well. So on our own, we've got different departments. We also are operating in teams across different geographies and sometimes languages as well. All of this requires a different way of thinking about and acting with content. In other words, to succeed, we must retool. We have to rethink our systems as well as our ways of working. In my mind, there are three aspects of this. The first is finding ways to really dramatically accelerate time to market. And a large part of this is empowering each of our teams to do their best work without getting in each other's way and without fear that they're going to screw up something or cause an impediment to someone else. This is about having really flexible systems designed for the particular requirements and needs of those different teams that need to come together. Think of the dev and development teams, the marketing teams, the merchandising teams. They all have a role to play. And the more that we can facilitate each of those teams doing their best work, the better we are able to get things quickly to market. And that's really important when it comes to things like experimentation. We also need to look at generative AI. And I talked a bit about how Gen AI is changing the way we search and find information, but it's clearly also having a major impact in how we produce things, how we do our work, how in some cases we're actually even generating content, whether that's words or images. We increasingly need to use generative AI as a tool to help us to accelerate the kinds of work that we're already doing, to improve our ability to focus on the stuff that really matters, the creative, valuable work. It is, in essence, something we should look at as a force multiplier. In many cases, we don't really have a choice. We're not necessarily getting additional resources or headcount. And yet, in many cases, the things being asked of us are continuing to increase. So a means to an end, definitely, in my view, is the right context for thinking about generative AI. All of this, of course, is in service of the ultimate goal, which is building and creating connections. We want to connect with the right audiences. And most of the time, in a lot of the conversations we're having, that is about customer audiences. It's not just customers, though. In some cases, it might be informing our own colleagues and building those relationships internally. It's anywhere that content and storytelling is really helping us to convey information, to transmit a feeling, and to prompt action. So the more that we can use tools that free us up to focus on the really important work of figuring out what's going to drive and initiate those connections, what's going to build and deepen them, the more successful we're likely to be. And that's it from me on some of the big things around the future of content. Thanks for listening.